What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video, and this we're going to take a look at the template team. So the highest owned picks right now, and decide whether or not they're worth it or whether you should be looking at someone else, including some differentials. Just before we jump into the video, quick reminder that the deadline for Game Week 1 is on Friday, so you've still got enough time to sign up for Fantasy Football Hub. Loads of useful tools over there, and the best thing is they got up to 50% off at the moment, and if you sign up and don't win your mini league, they will give you your money back. Terms and conditions do apply. All the links you need are in the description below. So let's start off with the goalkeepers and defenders, and basically I've put the highest owned players in each position into the starting 11, apart from Areola, who I've put on the bench because that's where most people are going to play him in their actual squads. Interestingly, right now he's the highest owned goalkeeper in FPL at 31.2% because people are hoping he'll take that number one shirt at West Ham, but everything we've seen in pre-season so far doesn't help us. In the last friendly, Fabianski was in the starting 11, and I think Areola came on at half-time, so they split game time, and unless David Moyes tells us who's number one, we're probably not going to know before the Game Week 1 deadline. Now, as it stands, I would still have him in my team, but that might change soon because Matt Turner of Arsenal is rumoured to be joining Nottingham Forest. There are a couple of issues here though. If that transfer doesn't go through before the Game Week 1 deadline, he'll still be listed as being an Arsenal, and if you want him in your team for when he goes to Forest, you can only have two other Arsenal players. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm planning on having Saka, Gabriel, and then probably Martinelli as well. So if I've got them, I can't also have Turner. So from an FPL point of view, we need that transfer to go through before the Game Week 1 deadline. If it does, he would definitely go in ahead of Areola, unless we know Areola's the number one, because he should be first choice at Nottingham Forest. But that's not where the problems stop, because another goalkeeper, Dean Henderson, is still rumoured to be wanted by Forest, even if they buy Turner, and you would presume that Henderson would be above him in the pecking order. The only thing is, Henderson has been injured and he's been recovering, so he's not going to be available for Game Week 1. So it's whether or not Turner will lose the shirt. Either way, if he moves before Game Week 1, Turner will definitely be my goalkeeper ahead of Areola. In goal, Onana, 25% owned, is the second highest owned goalkeeper. And I fully get it, right? You can back that Man United defence for cheaper than Luke Shaw. And compared to the other 5 million goalkeepers like Ramsdale and Kepa, he's definitely the best because Arsenal were kind of rumoured to buy Raya. That's why Turner's going to probably leave. And obviously Chelsea have bought Sanchez. So Ramsdale and Kepa might not be number one for a long period of time. They'll probably both start the season. But is it worth taking the risk? Probably not. So I do like Onana, but if we look at the list of the other goalkeepers you could go for, you got Ederson for 0.5 million more. You could back those Man City clean sheets. He's 14.1% owned. If you wanted to go for a different 5 million, you got Martinez, who's 7.9% owned. Now, I personally would prefer to have a 4.5 million defender from Villa if the fixtures were good enough. You know, maybe Konza, Pau Torres should get enough minutes. But if you want to back them right from the start long term, Martinez could be the way to do it. But I don't think that's where I'm going to go. The 4.5 million goalkeepers are a little bit more interesting. I think with the fixtures that most of them have, you could make a case they're just as good as Onana, but you also save 0.5 million that you could spend elsewhere. And one thing to take note of is Everton and Nottingham Forest rotate really nicely. So if Turner is number one, you could pair him with Pickford. And I know people don't like rotating goalkeepers because sometimes you'll bench your main goalkeeper in a tough fixture, they'll nick a clean sheet, loads of saves, bonus points, and it can feel harsh or feels horrible, to be honest. But it would only be in the really tough fixtures where you would play Turner. If you really don't want to play him, then you just play your 4.5 anyway. So I quite like Pickford for that reason. He was someone I had in my opening draft, and then I kind of got cold feet because of the Everton defence. But if I compare him with a 4 million that rotates nicely, then I'm interested. I think with Steele, I've got enough doubts about Verbruggen that I probably wouldn't go for it. Plus, it means doubling up with Estepinian. Now, most of the time when you buy players, you should think in isolation. So if Steele is the best 4.5, it shouldn't matter that you own Estepinian. But at the start of the season, I'm a little bit more... I'm not against it, but I'd be a bit more worried about doubling up on defences, just in case we've got it wrong. What if the Brighton defence turns out to be not as good? What if Caicedo does go to Chelsea and they struggle early on? I'd rather see what happens and maybe double up later on in the season than right from the start. And I do think Steele will be the number one goalkeeper for what it's worth, but Verbruggen's been brought in for a reason. And if he's playing the cup games and Europa League and stuff like that, if he puts in a bunch of good performances and still has a couple of howlers, we know De Zerbi is happy to change goalkeepers. So I think that would be enough to put me off him. Flecken is someone I still really like. If we look at the fixtures for Brentford early on, Spurs at home not great, but then it's Fulham, Palace, Bournemouth, Newcastle is tough, but then it's Everton, Forest, Man United away, then it's Burnley at home. They got some pretty nice kind of short and medium term fixtures, and if you're not quite sure where you're going to or when you're going to wildcard, I like him as a pick. And then you got Johnson at Crystal Palace as well. But Onana in general is a pretty solid pick. Just on the defenders, I still question whether Estepinian is quite so good that he should be 51.6% ownership, but I am a hypocrite because I'm definitely going to own him. I think the opening fixtures are really good. I think if you get to Newcastle at home in Game Week 4 and you've got someone decent on your bench or a spare transfer, you could get rid of him. It's not the end of the world if you have to play him. And if you can get through Man United away in Game Week 5, he's then got Bournemouth at home in Game Week 6. I think for 5 million, it's really hard to look past him. Arguably, for the first 3 fixtures, he could be just as good, if not better, than lots of the defenders that cost 5.5. So I think with the goalkeepers, you could make a case to go against Onana. I think with a lot of the template defenders, they are just really solid picks, apart from Trippier. 35%, don't really get that. Game weeks 2 to 4 are really tough. Yes, you could play him in Game Week 1. It might be good to have a plan to get him in Game Week 5. I wouldn't start with him. John Stones is interesting. I'm actually a bit surprised he's the 3rd highest owned defender, 28.6%. I really like Chilwell and James for their attacking output, but I get why people are going for Stones because Man City's fixtures are really good. So from a defensive point of view, much better than Chelsea because of how strong their defence is. So I don't mind Stones as a pick, but it's probably not where I'm going to go unless I've got money for the bench. And then on the bench for this squad, it's Shaw and Gabriel. Again, really strong picks. I did look at some other defenders with lower ownership. I mean, Trent, 23.2%. We know what he can do. I'm pretty much going to go without him. I just think there's better ways to spend the money at the start of the season. But if you're someone that wants him in, absolutely no issues with that whatsoever. Ben Chilwell, 11.9% ownership. Reece James is around 15%. And Kunku's out until December. Right now, I've got no idea who takes penalties for Chelsea. My top 3 or 4 picks would probably be Jackson, Sterling, maybe Enzo Fernandez. Someone said to me he's got a 5 out of 5 record, or it could be Reece James. That could be tempting. I don't know if we'll know before the deadline, though. Ruben Dias may be slightly better for minutes than Stones, because if Pep's going to manage one of the two, it'll probably be John Stones. He always seems to have like a little injury that he's struggling with or something like that. It's probably fine to start the season with, but I don't know if his attacking threat is that much better than Ruben Dias. So for the same price and lower ownership, you could go for him instead. And then you got the 4.5s. Colwill is 3% owned. Pinnock is 1.9. The reason I've put him in this list ahead of Henry is because Henry is currently flagged. And it does look like Pinnock's going to start the season as first choice centre-back ahead of Collins. And his goal threat is pretty decent as well. And then you Doggy at Spurs, 1.2%, who should play pretty much most games as their left-back. And interestingly, when I go on to Fantasy Football Hub and I look at the points projections for the first 8 game weeks, you got the likes of Trent, Stones, Trippier right up there. I think if we go a little bit down, I didn't check this before I started recording, yeah, Pinnock is quite high up in terms of 4.5 million defenders. You got Botman as well, someone I hadn't mentioned in this video. I just don't like those fixtures game weeks 2 to 4, but Pinnock's quite high up there, and it goes back to those Brentford fixtures that I talked about with Flecken. So the template is always strong for a reason. It's always going to be good picks. I think Onana's fine, but if you want to say 0.5, the 4.5 goalkeepers are pretty good. Most of those template defenders, though, are just excellent choices. I love Gabriel, I love Estepinian, and then for most people, you're only really picking one more anyway. For me right now, it's Chilwell. So as you can imagine, the midfield is really strong. You've got the second highest owned player in the game right now, Bukayo Saka at 56.2%. Rashford is 45.1%. Matoma is 38%. And Bruno Fernandes is 26.6%. Now, with a lot of people on 3-5-2 formations this year, I've gone for the same. And because of that, Mo Salah just about sneaks in at 23.5% ownership. But that is a lot lower than he has been in previous seasons. And we'll come back onto him in a minute. Now, obviously, the title of this video is breaking the template. We've already gone through some differential goalkeepers and defenders. We will do the same for midfielders. But I do think Saka and Rashford are just really solid picks, and I would not be going out of my way to not own them. Like, they've been in most of the drafts that I've put together, and I just think Saka is better than Odegaard with penalties and minutes for the same price, and I think he's worth the extra 0.5 over Martinelli as well. If he loses penalties, then we'll have another conversation around him, but given his minutes in that Arsenal attack and the other options they now have for other positions, I still think he would make it in my Game Week 1 team without penalties. And Rashford is just the strongest goal threat at Man United. And even with Højlund coming in, Rashford is probably going to get more minutes, especially at the start of the season. And the opening fixtures for Man United are pretty decent as well. And although Fernandes has got the penalties, I think Rashford is probably just about worth that extra 0.5 because of his open goal play threat, which is higher than all the Arsenal midfielders as well. So Martinelli, Odegaard and Saka overall, really good stats last year, but they were mostly a mix of expected goals and expected assists. Rashford skews much higher to scoring goals, and they are worth more points. So that's why I kind of favour him over necessarily a different Arsenal midfielder. With the rest of the picks, it's a little bit different. Like Mitoma, for example, is he that much better than an Eze or an Mbeumo for the same price, even a Diaby for Villa? Maybe not, but his ownership is a lot higher. Part of that reason is definitely the first fixture. Like, don't get me wrong, Brighton's opening 3, Luton at home, I think it's Wolves away, West Ham at home, are just strong in general. But in particular, that Luton at home fixture has got a lot of people keen to own them. And I do think Mitoma's a great pick. There's been lots of discussion over the last week or so about the amount of options that Brighton have. But I think sometimes when we're discussing these things, we just forget about who's first choice. And Mitoma is absolutely first choice left wing for Brighton. And I'd be very surprised if he doesn't start all of the first 3 fixtures. Of course, that doesn't mean he'll make it to 90 minutes every game. And because of all those options that Brighton have, maybe he gets subbed off early. And if he hasn't got his return at that point, it might be that the other 6.5s that are likely to play longer, maybe have penalties, could be a slightly better option. So I don't want to sit here and put people off Mitoma, but that is definitely one of these template picks where you could go for someone else instead. And don't forget that Brighton do have Europa League after the international break, and there will be rotation there. De Zerbi said it himself, and also we just have to look to last year, end of the season, when there was fixture congestion for Brighton and they were playing weekend, midweek, weekend. They rotated then, and Mitoma didn't miss a huge amount of games, but he might miss the odd one. So perfectly good for the start of the season, but it might not be quite as good of a long-term option compared to some other players, which we'll talk about in a second. I do think Bruno Fernandes is really strong as well. Again, Man United's opening fixture's good, minutes great, he's on penalties. There is some talk about the fact he might drop a bit deeper, might go further forward. I personally don't think it's going to be enough to make Fernandes a bad option, but I also like that price point because you can drop down to anyone else, and it just feels a bit safer to start with him and then maybe go to an unknown player later rather than the reverse. But again, if you're looking at this midfield thinking I'm going to bet against it, then Fernandes would definitely be one over Marcus Rashford for me. And then you got Mo Salah. Loads of talk about him all during pre-season. For what it's worth, I think that ownership will start to go up by the time we get to the Game Week 1 deadline, because people like me will get afraid of not owning him because of how good he's been the last 6 seasons. I do think the option of spreading the funds might be better, but I am worried about locking myself out from him. Like for Game Week 1, a midfield of Saka, Rashford, Fernandes, Martinelli, a 6.5 probably is better than owning Salah, but how quickly will that last? And then if you want to get Salah in, it's probably 3 to 4 transfers to do it because you've got to shift funds around. So it might be easier to start with him. The other thing that I've considered, which maybe I've changed my mind a little bit on from the Game Week preview video, which only went out today, is that if Kane stays, and that is looking more likely, if you've got Salah and you need to switch, they're exactly the same price. I'm not saying that the combination would work as well. So if you've got Salah and João Pedro, which a lot of people are going to be looking at now, going to Kane and a 5.5 million midfielder is not necessarily as good, but you've still got the option. And again, if you want to get Kane in with the kind of template that we've been seeing with that midfield I just spoke about, it does get a little bit tougher unless you're going to sell Haaland. So that is one plus for Salah. And obviously he does score a lot of points, right? We know that. Pre-season, I think he's got like 9 returns. He's the only nailed player in that Liverpool attack. So he is still great. It just depends how many sacrifices you're willing to make. And that is something that I'm still kind of trying to weigh up. In terms of the midfielders that we could look at that are lower owned, like I said, Mitoma 38%, Eze only 15.9, and Burmo only 14.4. Both of those players great for minutes, have penalties, no Europe as well. They could well be better long-term picks. In Burmo in particular, Spurs at home, not as good as Luton at home, but if he scores in that game, and then you see the fixtures Brentford have got afterwards, I can see him being an early bandwagon. Of course, he could blank, Mitoma could score twice, and everyone will just sell in Burmo, because that can happen as well. But that is playing on my mind. If you want a second Arsenal attacker, Martinelli is only 14% owned. Again, I don't think it's worth having Martinelli instead of Saka, but having both of them is obviously good. De Bruyne, only 13.8% owned, partly because he hasn't played a lot during pre-season, but he got minutes in the Community Shield. Man City's opening fixtures are fantastic. I'm just going to pull them up here. So you got Burnley away, Newcastle at home, Sheffield United away, Fulham at home, West Ham away, Forest at home. There's a reason... Well, I mean, we all own Haaland because he's an absolute machine, but there's a reason we want more Man City players, and maybe De Bruyne is a shrewd differential that you can go for that I've barely seen anyone in the Twitter and YouTube community looking at, and you would hope that the minutes he got in the Community Shield will mean he starts games going forward. There is obviously a risk. Maybe Burnley gets rested, but after that, you'd imagine he's going to play most of the time when he's fit. You've got James Maddison, 12.8% ownership. Personally, I think for those looking at Foden, I just think he's too much of a headache. You don't know when he's going to start. Maddison's going to play 80 to 90 minutes every single game he's fit. No Europe or anything like that. He's going to take set pieces. If Kane stays, that just makes Maddison an even better option. He's gone from supplying, no disrespect, but he's gone to supplying kind of Leicester forwards to supplying Son and Kane. It's just a step up in quality, and that's just going to make him better. His underlying numbers are already good. I suspect they'll be just as good, if not slightly better this year. And then we've got to talk about Havertz, 7.5 million, 5.3% ownership, played up front against City in the Community Shield. Doesn't necessarily mean he'll do it again against Forest, but it's a possibility. And even if he doesn't, he probably plays at number 8 with license to get forward. So if you are looking for a differential at Arsenal, you don't want to go Saka, Odegaard or Martinelli, then maybe Havertz is the one. Is he someone that I'll go for? Probably not, but he is someone that you could consider. And again, if we just quickly look at the points projections on Hub, and if you want to check all this stuff out yourself, again, up to 50% off at the moment, links in the description below. First 8 game weeks for midfielders, Salah's highest, as you might imagine, but he's obviously very expensive. Then it's Rashford and Fernandes. So again, don't go out of your way to back against these players. Then it's De Bruyne, but obviously he's a bit more money as well. I just spoke about him as a differential. Then it's Saka. So 3 of those high-owned players, Rashford, Fernandes and Saka, are all in the top 5 for projected points. There's a reason for that. Then you've got Maddison just behind Son. Son is someone we've not talked about a lot. Spurs fans keep telling me he's playing too wide during pre-season. Is he going to get in front of goal enough? I'd imagine he would, because that's his best kind of position to be in. But we'll have to wait and see. Is it worth spending 9 million where you can just get a Rashford? Maybe not. Then you've got Mitoma, Martinelli, and Burmo and Eze, who are all very close together. So if you want to go against this template, there's definitely some options. I'm getting more and more tempted to bet against Mitoma, I've got to be honest. And then up front, it's Erling Haaland at 86.5% ownership and Ollie Watkins at 22.9%. And I've said this a lot. Haaland's ownership levels are absolutely ridiculous, to the point where it feels too scary to go without him. And I'm not someone that picks players based on ownership, contrary to popular belief. But at those kind of levels, going without him just feels like chasing a lost cause. Even if you're the type of FPL manager where you don't care about overall rank, you want to go differential, I still don't know if there's any point betting against him. Like, if you're going to go against the template, just do it in other positions. And it's not really helped by how good Man City's fixtures are. We just looked at them with Kevin De Bruyne. And I know there's that stat going around that in the last 6 games for City, Haaland hasn't scored. But you've got to ask yourself, do you think that's going to continue? Or when he starts the first 6 games and has Burnley away, Sheffield United away, Fulham at home, could the goals come back? I suspect they might. And in the first 6 game weeks, he could easily come away with 6 to 10 goals. It's definitely not impossible given what we saw last year. So I would rather just be on him and be wrong rather than be against him and he does what he did last season. You could go for maybe a Kane and a Salah, no Haaland, and just rotate captaincy between them. That could work. You've also got the likes of Saka and Rashford you could captain as well. Even in game week 1, Saka against Forest at home instead of Haaland against Burnley away. Maybe if you are feeling like going that differential route. But for me, there's a reason he's so template, and I will definitely start with him. Ollie Watkins is a little bit different. He's become more popular because Jesus got injured. Obviously, Nkunku's out as well. He just feels like the next best pick. You know he's always going to start. Probably still has penalties. Minutes are great. I think fixture-wise, they're not bad for Aston Villa. Like Newcastle away is not a fixture I would look to target. But straight after that, it's Everton at home, Burnley away. Then you've got Liverpool away. Will their defence be good? We don't really know. Let's wait and see. Palace at home, not bad. Chelsea away, will their defence be good? Again, it's a wait and see. But overall, I don't think they're fixtures that would necessarily put you off Watkins. So he's always been a good pick. But personally, I preferred to go for either Jesus or Nkunku. But right now, that's impossible because they're injured. So therefore, Watkins is the default pick. Now, if you want to go different, there are definitely other forwards that you could look at. Got a whole list here. So Nicholas Jackson, 13.9% at Chelsea. Now, there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter especially over whether the Nkunku injury makes Jackson better or worse. Now, minutes-wise, I think it makes him better. I know what people will say. Jackson was playing as the 9 and Nkunku was playing as the 10, so what difference does it make? But if Pochettino wanted to bring Jackson off, he had Nkunku that could go and play up front instead. That player is now not available, so I would expect this to be an overall benefit to Jackson's minutes, even if it's not a massive increase. So that's good. There is maybe a chance he gets penalties because he's their kind of first choice number 9 right now, but he hasn't taken one as far as I know, so that does seem unlikely. Overall, though, I expect Chelsea to be worse in attack without Nkunku. And actually, when you go and look at that team, it doesn't necessarily look that great on paper. Like Mudryk on the left, who's going to play number 10 now without Nkunku? Sterling on the right, Jackson up front. Like, don't get me wrong, he's done great during pre-season, but he's not got a huge amount of games under his belt for Villarreal. And now he's coming straight in the Premier League. It's a lot different playing Premier League games than it is to kind of pre-season friendlies. So I'm a bit sceptical about him, but I do like the price of 7 million. And with the fixtures Chelsea have, that is a punt worth taking if that's the kind of FPL manager that you are. Harry Kane, only 13.8% ownership, may well stay at Spurs. His and Salah's ownership combined is about 37%. When have we seen that before? Not very often. So he's definitely someone to look at. João Pedro getting much more popular, especially on Twitter, 5.5 million. I would be surprised if he doesn't start the first 3 games. He's probably their first choice number 10. And De Zerbi has also said that he could play number 9 as well. Now, that doesn't mean he'll never be rotated. And Enciso could play 10, Lallana can play 10. And obviously, if one of those two does play, it doesn't automatically mean that João Pedro will play up front. Ferguson and Welbeck are there as well. But for everything we've seen in pre-season and how many minutes he's had, and the last pre-season friendly where he lined up in that number 10 position, I'd be surprised if he doesn't start Luton and Wolves and West Ham. The only issue is how do you get off that price point if you need to, because around 5.5 to 6 million the options aren't great, so you would need money to go elsewhere. I've talked about this before. If you go for Salah and João Pedro, then maybe there is an easy way out there, right? You go to like a Rashford, Fernandes plus a Watkins or whoever it is, but then you've got money left over that you could have just spent initially. And also, what if you don't want to get rid of Salah, right? Then you're kind of maybe stuck with João Pedro. So I've looked at it quite a lot, and I'll talk about it more on my team selection video tomorrow. I think João Pedro is good if you want Kane or Salah. He's also good if you like a deep bench, or have like 5.5 million defenders on your bench. If you just want him instead of Watkins, there's a lot of money left over, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. That can leave you quite flexible in the first few weeks. But I think some people are getting to the point where they think João Pedro is a better option than Watkins outright. I mean, maybe for game week 1, Luton at home, but outside of that, he's not. So it really depends how you use the money. I can see myself talking into starting with him. That's all I'll say. If you're going to go for a Liverpool forward, actually on the template team, Darwin Núñez is the 3rd highest owned forward at 16.6%. That's why I've put him on the bench. I don't think you can go for him. He's not started either of the last 2 friendlies. Maybe he gets a start either against Chelsea or against Bournemouth, but you're not going to be able to call it. And one of the reasons for that is because Gakpo is just a much better presser. So off the ball, he does more work for Liverpool than Darwin Núñez would. And I think if you're going to go for a Liverpool forward, he's one to look at 7.5 million, 6% ownership. You could look at Jota as well. I think there is the issue with Gakpo is if he does play, but he's not number 9, he could go and play as the number 8 instead. And actually in the last friendly, I think Jota played up front. So Jota could be an option in midfield as well. But between Gakpo and Darwin, if I was going to go for one right now, I would choose Gakpo. Wissa, not very popular, only 4.7% owned, but he has been talked about a lot during pre-season. Only 6 million. Should start up for Brentford, but I wouldn't be as convinced about his minutes as I would be for Mbeumo. Like, it could be... I need to double check his name now so I don't get it wrong, because that'll be super embarrassing. I want to say it's Lewis Potter. Yeah, Lewis Potter could be on the left, Wissa up front, and Mbeumo on the right. But Sharda could play a part as well, and he could play through the middle. So that's why I don't think Wissa's minutes are quite as secure. It's also worth saying that Brentford were in for Brennan Johnson, and obviously they have lost Tony, so they may well still spend some money on a striker, especially if they sell David Raya. So I don't think it's completely out of the question that even after game week 1 they bring a new forward in, and that might be a bit of a risk for Wissa. I think he'll start the season. I think the fixtures are great. If he holds his place, he'll be a good option for 6 million. But he's not as guaranteed, in my opinion, as Mbeumo is. So just keep an eye on that. And then I stuck Alvarez in here. Lots of people were talking up Foden playing centrally. Didn't happen in the Community Shield. Alvarez played there instead. Even if De Bruyne is fit, Alvarez could start in that position ahead of the likes of Kovacic and Foden. But I do think unless we know for sure he's playing against Burnley game week 1, I would probably avoid him. So that is the template overall. The highest owned picks in each position in a 3-5-2 formation: Onana, Estupiñán, Trippier, Stones, Saka, Rashford, Matoma, Fernandes, Salah, Haaland, Watkins. Lots of solid picks there, lots of alternatives. Let me know in the comments below which of those players you are going to go without, and I will have my team selection video tomorrow to talk through how my current setup is for game week 1. If you've enjoyed that, give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and make sure to check out Fantasy Football Hub. Links in the comments below, up to 50% off at the moment. And remember, if you sign up, don't win your mini league, you can get your money back. Terms and conditions apply. Check all the links in the description below, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.